Okay, so this is my version of the interviews that I've been doing with male dancers and dance professionals and people across the dance profession to discuss what got them started. So, as I would do with an interviewee who wasn't me, someone I was interviewing, I'll try to brief out some of the issues involved. So, what I've done is a kind of series of questions. And the first question is, who was I at the time that I started dancing? Um, Tricky. I was at university in Nova Scotia, Dalhousie University. Big place. I was in the theatre department. I'm beginning to find my way to think about dancing. Now, this is predicated on having done a lot of dancing on Friday nights, Saturday nights in the past of that period, and found that as satisfying as it was to have that experience, it wasn't all. And in trying to find out what might be all, I've started looking around at daring to do some other classes, or some classes. These included an attempt at some ballroom when I was about 14. Didn't work out. Some ballet classes when I was about 19. These were very weird. I was in a room full of 12-year-old girls, a very supportive teacher, but she didn't really take me to where I wanted to be, and the culture of little girl ballet was not really where I wanted to go. So I took up with a girlfriend, and she had quite a starry career. She ended up as a member of the Martha Graham Company, so we were playing in pretty high stakes art scenes. We danced with a friend of hers named Anita Martin, of whom I've entirely lost track, and so is this other associate. Hopefully, one day she'll turn up. Maybe she'll read this. We started doing Cunningham classes, not so much the technique work, but a kind of broad-based, what I now know to be a broad-based contemporary dance class, followed by a lot of improvisational exercises. She's studying with people in and around the new dance culture, or the postmodern dance culture of New York, and was bringing some of those fairly avant-garde processes to us. That carried on for a while. Those were those early influences. Now, the next question I would ask another interviewee would be, when did this occur in terms of historic things? Well, this was 1969 through 1974. The process in '69 was this first class of ballet stuff, and of course, 1969 is just after the '68 revolutions in Europe, particularly Paris. It's got a kind of hip sensation of long-haired youth. Most of my friends were dedicated to the rock and roll scene, particularly my brothers. A lot of my friends were athletes. We'd spent a lot of time surfing, so Beach Boys were part of it, as much as Beatles, as much as many other contemporary art forms of the time. We were soon up to our eyes in Vietnam and the influence of that, and trying to hold on to our own thinkings. I guess one of the opportunities that came from that period was that Anita Martin, who I'd mentioned earlier, came with a guy who had left the United States to basically leave all of that stuff behind. That was pretty interesting. We were trying to be hippies. There were lots of drugs around. There was always, for me, a Friday night, a Saturday night for dancing. That was a good period of time for those sorts of things. Where did this occur? As I said earlier, I was at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. The push from that in its development went on to Toronto, where I studied Toronto Dance Theatre. being an impoverished student type without a particular career path at that time, I found myself going back and forth between Toronto and Halifax to be at home, and then adventures back in Toronto trying to get into dance studios. That brought me back to Halifax. Again, the problem with Halifax is it's unlikely that anyone can really make a prominent dance career in the Maritime provinces. I've done the tour twice. It takes a month. We need to work 12 months. Anyway, so that had to get me moving on. So first Toronto, and then on to London, where London Contemporary Dance Theatre was my main training ground at that point. So what dance did we do? Well, after I got out of the ballrooms, and these were ballrooms at YMCA's and university campuses, so it wasn't any kind of formality in a kind of ballroom sense. It was a formality in terms of what youth get up to. So it was the Hully Gully, the twist, the frug, the hug, the whatever the dance crazes were at the time. Moving from jiving together, holding hands with people and contacting your partner, to predominantly, after the twist, working entirely singularly in the space, and that contact was made by eyes, except for the slow dance, which was always a charm. And I was a charmer in that too, I guess. So straight from that was to move into modern dance. And modern dance, as I knew it then, was something that consisted of beginning to see that Martha Graham existed. So I was doing these Cunningham improv classes, and I was doing Graham eventually to contact classes through the process in London. Lots of Graham. 3 goes at beginner Graham. Toronto, London Contemporary Summer School, and then London Contemporary First Term of Study. I got my Graham grounding pretty solidly through those processes. It forced me into big decisions about where to live and where to study. Halifax couldn't be it, so I had to leave home. Toronto, interesting, but studio-based classes. There was ballet available at the University of York, but the sort of thing I wanted in a contemporary vein was much more prominently available either in New York, but again I only knew the studios, or in London, where the studios had turned into that major study place. Why do I do it? Why did I do it? Why did I continue to do it? Interestingly, at an early stage, one of my co-dancers in sort of intermediate level classes said, "Oh, I'm not going to carry on with this. I'm going to go and get married," she said. "But you don't. You're bound to make it." And I don't know what that meant entirely in terms of make it, because that hadn't been defined for me. And I had to define it myself. So in defining it, I guess I went to saying that my definition of success was going to be that I worked in the field. And in that sense, it's been a pretty successful career because I'm still in it. It's been a number of careers, and each one of them has had its overlaps of content, so I'm still working in the studio just as I was in 1969. But the fun of it is that I'm still doing that stuff. I'm not the wide-eyed youth being taught in the same way anymore. I'm now teaching wide-eyed youths. I'm making dances with them, for them, on them, around them, to them, because of them, and watching them do that. And that's been the progression through. Now it's in higher education, so I have to find ways and means of assessing. And I think I've achieved that fairly well. And that's the interest. The interest is in an embodied art form, a physical self, not separated from any intellectual or other kind of self, and the enjoyment that comes with that, and the sophistication of the thinking that I now do in my body. And notions of thinking in the body continue to attract me. Yeah. Thinking in the body.